Hey everyone, welcome back to the next installment on how to write humor. Okay, today, the tactic I'm going to focus on is just presentation, right? How we present things can be funny. So for this one, the humor really comes from maybe not so much like in the events and like the content of what's going on, but in the way that that content is presented. So tone and voice definitely come into play here, and this tactic also usually has a bit of exaggeration, but doesn't need to have exaggeration. So if you look at a series of unfortunate events, right, people love Lemony Snicket's books, and they like them for the way the narrator presents the story. Most people like it that way more than they like the story itself, right? What I love about Lemony Snicket is that his very writing is what is the joke. He plays with writing rules and grammar in ways that anyone, even people who aren't versed in storytelling, can laugh at. So I've grabbed a few lines in particular. This one's going to be a little hard to read, but I'll do my best. So here's one. He says, "If writers wrote as carelessly as some people talk, then hajikawaja habajabajabaja," which is gibberish, right? And that's in the book. Here's another example of Lemony Snicket's. This is in the story. "If an optimist had his left arm chewed off by an alligator, he might say in a pleasant but hopeful voice, 'Well, this isn't too bad. I don't have a left arm anymore, but at least nobody will ask me if I'm left-handed or right-handed.' But most of us would say something more along the lines of, 'Ah, my arm! My arm!'" Okay, here's another one. "A man of my acquaintance once wrote a poem called 'The Road Less Traveled,' describing a journey he took through the woods along a path most travelers never used. The poet found that the road less traveled was peaceful but quite lonely, and he was probably a bit nervous as he went along, because if anything happened on the road less traveled, the other travelers would be on the road more frequently traveled, and so couldn't hear him as he cried for help. Sure enough, that poet is dead." Okay, next one. "A passport, as I'm sure you know, is a document that one shows to government officials whenever one reaches a border between two countries, so that the official can learn who you are, where you were born, and how you look when photographed unflatteringly." So if you haven't read any of the Lemony Snicket books, yes, like he writes this way as he's actually telling an actual story. This isn't like some humorous essay. This is how he writes novels, and they aren't even about him. The other characters are the protagonists and antagonists. So it's Lemony Snicket's voice that people find funny, or extremely annoying if that's not your preference, right? He presents stories in interesting ways with a strong, unique voice that can be witty in what is not said and funny in stating the obvious, what is said. So you might want to make note of that little tactic. Witty in what is not said and ridiculously obvious in what is said. But other times, Lemony Snicket can be like wittily wise, and readers have to stop and take in the significance of what he said in such a ridiculous manner. So you can create a witty voice to tell your story. It can be the protagonist's voice, and you can play with that and have that be like her worldview is what's funny. But you don't have to go way out there like Lemony Snicket. I mean, his whole books are written in that style. You can present a scene in a funny tone. So perhaps one of my favorite chapters in Harry Potter of all time is when Harry drinks this potion called the Felix Felicis, and I always get tongue-tied on it, but the luck potion, okay? It's a potion that makes people lucky. And I love how J.K. Rowling switches the tone to account for Harry being under the influence of this potion. So if you have the book, you really should go read it because it's so well done. But here's just a sample that I kind of have that I've put together, bits and pieces. Harry took out the rolled-up sock at the bottom of his trunk and extracted the tiny, gleaming bottle. "Well, here goes," said Harry, and he raised the little bottle and took a carefully measured gulp. Then, slowly but surely, an exhilarating sense of infinite opportunity stole through him. It felt as though he could have done anything. It was when he reached the bottom step that it occurred to him how very pleasant it would be to pass the vegetable patch on his way to Hagrid's. It was not strictly on the way, but it seemed clear to Harry that this was a whim on which he should act, so he directed his feet immediately toward the vegetable patch, where he was pleased but not altogether surprised to find Professor Slughorn in conversation with Professor Sprout. Harry lurked behind a low stone wall, feeling at peace with the world and listening to their conversation. Professor Sprout headed off into the gathering darkness in the direction of her greenhouses, and Slughorn directed his steps to the spot where Harry stood, invisible. Seized with an immediate desire to reveal himself, Harry pulled off the cloak with a flourish. So if you are familiar with the tone of the Harry Potter books, and particularly the tone of Harry's character himself, phrases like an exhilarating sense of infinite opportunity stole through him, or it occurred to him how very pleasant it would be to pass through the vegetable patch, or Harry lurked behind a low stone wall, feeling at peace with the world, or seized with an immediate desire to reveal himself, and even the word flourish are hilariously out of character with Harry in the book itself. Not only is the content of the situation that's set up in that scene is pretty funny, and in that chapter, J.K. Rowling does a good job of building on the humor in several ways, but the tone of these phrases make it pretty funny too, in contrast to what's come before and what comes after in these books. While affecting the right voice or tone can help you write humorously on kind of more of a natural, intuitive level, there are actually some tricks of actual writing that can help you present something as funny also. So the first, I guess I'll call these subcategories, would be, so this is going to be about emphasis, okay? So sometimes to present something as humorous, all you need is the right emphasis, right? When I took a drama class in high school, I remember my teacher saying, well, swear words are just there to add emphasis. And I kind of got what he was saying, but I was a bit skeptical, I wasn't sure I bought the just part. I still don't know. But I think swear words do more and mean more than that. I think it's more than just emphasis, but I think he was right about the emphasis part. So, I mean, really, you can use swearing, you can use swear words, that emphasis as part of an example. I tweaked this example just because, hey, we're on YouTube. Hi, kids. And I don't have a very flowery language myself, but so in my example that I talked about in The Fault in Our Stars, right, there's the line, the support group, of course, was depressing as heck. Doesn't say heck. This sentence is funny on multiple levels, and the first is that it has that contrast, right? That irony. It's a support group and it's depressing. That's funny. But John Green adds that emphasis, right? As heck. Listen to how this sentence sounds without that part. The support group, of course, was depressing. Like, do you feel how that version is lacking that kind of extra punch at the end, right? The support group, of course, was depressing as heck. So, swear words have lent themselves to last for ages. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people laugh when Ron in the Harry Potter series, right, he has a phrase or whatever that is a little bit vulgar. I mean, it doesn't really offend me, but I'll keep it clean here, you guys. But when he says that, we aren't laughing at the situation itself, right? We're laughing at Ron's reaction to it. And we're laughing at Ron's reaction to it partly because of the emphasis that the swear words carry. So there is a comedian that I find hilarious. He swears a ton, so I hardly ever listen to him or recommend him. But the whole reason he swears is because it adds emphasis to his jokes. It adds that extra punch that can draw out a few more laughs from the audience. But then here's the thing. What if you have characters who don't swear? Or what if you're not really into swearing? Like I talked about, I tend to have really clean language in my day-to-day life. Well, that's okay. Remember, the thing is that it's the emphasis that counts. And you can get a similar effect by using the right diction or syntax, or by using sentence fragments. If you look back at our example sentence from The Fault in Our Stars, you'll see there are actually two moments of emphasis, right? The support group, of course, that's in commas, was depressing as heck. So the of course has a lesser emphasis. So listen to that again. The support group, of course, was depressing as heck. So you see how, of course, it pulls from that predictability humor, right, that I've talked about before. There are tricks and places in sentences, though, that are naturally more stressed than others because of the way we talk. So the first and last words in a sentence always have potential for emphasis, and the last word more so than the first word. In some cases, you can emphasize words or phrases in the middle of the sentence by setting it off with commas or dashes like John Green did, right? The support group, of course, was depressing as heck. Okay, so let's look at this example again. What I'm saying is I'm pulling from that same chapter in The Fault of Our Stars, and I referenced this paragraph in an earlier video. Okay, so here's this part. I noticed this because Patrick, the support group leader and the only person over 18 in the room, talked about the heart of Jesus every freaking meeting. All about how we, as young cancer survivors, were sitting right in Christ's very sacred heart and whatever. So you can kind of see right, we get the word freaking, kind of like that stand-in swear word. And we see how, I know you guys can't see it because you're listening, but if you look, he uses commas. Well, maybe you probably can't hear it because the way that I read it, right? Those pauses. He uses commas to create emphasis as young cancer survivors, right? So he made it funnier by doing that, and he makes it funnier by ending on the word whatever, so that it has that emphasis. Back when I was in college, everyone was reading Strunk and White's Elements of Style, and I read a different book called Style, The Basics of Clarity and Grace by Joseph M. Williams, and I definitely recommend it, even if you're doing things in it on an intuitive level. Reading this book will help you become conscious of it so you can do those things on purpose. So Joseph M. Williams' Style, it has a whole chapter dedicated to emphasizing word and phrases by altering sentence structure, and he can tell you how to end sentences lightly or strongly. This book is actually for essays and things like that, but I have definitely applied many parts that I've learned from this book into my creative writing. Alright, there's another way to get emphasis, okay? You might be familiar, if you've been in the creative writing world for a little bit, that there's this naughty phrase that your English teacher told you to never use, which is there are, or there is, or there were, or there was, because the argument is it doesn't actually tell us anything. Well, guess what? It's a really great tool to use to push a word you want, and to push a word that you want to the sentence's end for emphasis, right? Because the end word has the most emphasis. So let's say that you want to emphasize the word cows, and I don't know, in the context of the scene, it'll add humor because you've built it up before, right? I'm not going to do a huge example and go back, but you could write, some cows graze in the pasture, but that probably won't get a laugh out of the reader because there's no emphasis, right, on anything important. So it would be better to write something just like, there were cows. Also, the simplicity and invisibility of there were, it keeps the whole sentence's focus, in other words, more emphasis, on cows, right? The last word of the sentence. So the reader's attention isn't being divided between cows and grazed and pastures like my first example. It's just there were cows. That's it. Passive voice, which is another very naughty thing, can do the same thing, right? It can move emphasis onto the word that you want, right, when you play around with it. So likewise, it uses also boring, weak words that we're often told not to use. It uses those words so that it won't detract from the words you want to emphasize. So you can also emphasize by, passive voice, and you can also emphasize by doing sentence fragments, okay? So like if you wrote, there were cows, period. Fat cows, right? Fat cows has that extra emphasis. You can create a similar effect using colons. So you could say there were cows, colon, fat cows. But hopefully you can feel how the colon has a shorter pause than the period, right? The period creates more of an emphasis, that sentence fragment.